Hi friends, welcome to another video and episode of the James Red Podcast. Today I'm here with my friend Will Crooks, who is my OG creative conversation buddy. And it's always so nice to talk to him. It's fantastic that I can still have a conversation with him even though I live on the other side of the country. We used to have these in person. But he's a street portrait photographer and he loves fashion and incorporating that into his photos. And he's also the visual director at the Community Journals in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I met him and where I lived for a little while. And he is one of the most talented photographers I know, and I mean that. I mean that, Will.
Oh, embarrassment kicking in already.
Honesty. Dude, and like over the past little while, you've blossomed in a new way. You do great things.
Thank you, James. Yeah.
You bet.
I try really hard. That's the secret.
Okay.
That's all I got. All right, great.
And we're done. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Really hard.
This has been
most of the time, like at least 4 days of the week, hopefully 5 days of the week, hopefully 7 days of the week.
Wait, what? Oh, trying hard?
Yeah,
trying
hard.
That's
all it is.
As many days as possible. Make sure you get your sleep though, because it will kill you in a sinister way. You'll realize your family's gone, nobody loves you anymore, because all your emotions are screwed up and you alienated everybody. But I hate to go down such a dark route so quick. I wanted to talk a little bit about building a project. And for you, it's within the context of building a project in the photography world, since you are the visual director and a lot of your job is creating photos for one, but also putting projects together with other people in order to create these well-lit, beautiful portraits that end up going to digital as well as print. And there's a different dynamic that comes with that versus being a freelance photographer who shoots, weddings or birth photography or,
sure.
couples portraits, stock photography, what have you. It's much less lonesome. And I want to speak to this idea of putting together a scaffolding for a project and conceptualizing and collaborating and all of this. And so first off, what does that role look like for you at the Community Journals?
Sure. I mean, it kind of comes in a few different forms, but I would say sort of the main capacity of that is our writers pitch a story. It gets approved from the editorial side of things, from an EIC, and then sort of it launches into the phase of, what are we going to do photographically to represent this? And I mean, sometimes it may not even be photographic. Sometimes, we may be hiring an illustrator. We may be working in graphics. There's different things like that. But in general, like I'm most involved when it involves photography, either through myself or through a freelancer that I'm hiring.
Do you make decisions around design and overall aesthetic? Or is that somebody else's role? How do you play into that?
So on the design side, we have a pretty small team. So I work really closely with the designers for the product. And we kind of talk about what will work and won't work. There is sort of, I would say they do handle more of that, but sort of for covers and the larger features, we sort of talk about like how many art elements, if there's going to be other graphic elements, if there's going to be illustrative elements, kind of laying that first groundwork. And it's the same when talking with the writers, is like the foundation is really key, or you just kind of go into a shoot blind and come back with something that maybe is a really strong image, but doesn't work with the narrative the writer's telling, or just doesn't work either for the design. Say it's a one-page design where they want to integrate text. You can take an incredible portrait, but if the background's too busy, they can't put text on it.
If you don't leave room for the text.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, it can get a little technical, but I think across anything, it's like knowing that foundation is really the key.
So very quickly, how would you describe the Community Journals as an idea and a concept?
Okay. So Community Journals in its current state exists as a weekly newspaper slash features product that's sort of designed more in a magazine way, has more magazine-y features, but also features a news section and is community leaning. We also have another business. We have a business publication that's essentially like a weekly business magazine. It's designed just like a magazine, carries a small news section, but is more design heavy. Town magazines, like a lifestyle product we have that comes out once a month, and sort of is very photo heavy, beautiful design, much more intentional. And then we have a quarterly home magazine At Home. So we sort of run the gamut of production cycles. And then we do some niche pubs, like we do the visitor's guide for the city and a few things like that. So we kind of run the gamut of things that sit on the shelf a long time, things that are a little bit more focused digitally, things that are very heavy print products. And then we also have a daily email thing, Greenville Today. So we run like the entire gamut of daily content.
That's quite a bit of ongoing photography and creative projects, I'd say.
Yeah. So it provides a very interesting framework for working on a lot of different levels.
And you guys are generally featuring, businesses and artists, and what kind of other things?
I mean, it runs the gamut from literally like a wedding section to food, the arts and culture scene, obviously, to things even, protests. I mean, it really kind of blends that sort of...
Because Greenville, South Carolina is known for its protests.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
All of the violent protests that go on, trash cans through Starbucks windows, burning police cars.
Yeah, all the time. But yeah, so I mean, it's like, it really encompasses interiors. I mean, from a photography standpoint, I've had to shoot everything being a small company, from interiors to product to food to portraiture to lifestyle to more like, photojournalistic type stuff, kind of the entire gamut. I mean, it's the most comprehensive photography job I've ever been involved with.
Yeah. I can imagine. It seems that, at least outwardly, your role is to take these really beautiful, generally environmental type portraits that you have control over different elements, such as the scene, the lighting. It's a bit more set up than something like a street portrait, which you also have done for a very long time, which I think played a huge role in getting you this job at this place, which is a good example of how being a street photographer actually does have a financial benefit if you leverage it properly.
Yes.
Not
always.
Right, not always. You have to...
But there is something can come out of it.
I think it's really interesting how your style played in so well to what you're currently doing in a differently evolved form. It's so interesting to me. I love it.
Sure. I mean, it was definitely one of those things where, and we've spoken to this a lot, like my street portrait work tended to be sort of editorializing the street. It was like a more polished kind of, I used longer lenses. It was just sort of storytelling from a street portrait style in a way that isn't as common. I say most people generally work on like 50, 35, even as wide as 28.
You push in.
Yeah. So it's like it's a different style. And I mean, that's what I brought to sort of the Greenville Journal, was the idea that, our weekly products really weren't newspapers, and we were wanting to design them with larger photo elements and then more like a magazine. So sort of, why were we taking a photojournalistic approach when we could take an editorial approach to some topics that maybe could use sort of this a little bit more
stylization.
Yeah, like
perhaps.
To stylize the image a little bit more.
When you always spoke, and this was an interesting term that stuck with me. You always said that you like to romanticize the street as well.
Sure.
In the way that you shot, which is very different than a lot of street photographers. A lot of people want to show the rawness of the mundane, Whereas you found things that stuck out to you on an aesthetic sense. You found people and walked up to them and said, hey, can I take your portrait? Let's walk around the corner so that we can find a really nice background if you don't mind. And I'm going to put you on this wall that I love. So you're like scouting out backgrounds in your head, and then you're also scouting the people to put on the backgrounds. And what came out of that was a pretty interesting form of street photography. And you've always mentioned that you've been inspired by like the sartorialist, and that there are other people out there who do similar things to what you do. But I love the polish and the type of stuff that you do. It's funny. You may have noticed I've been going a little bit more candid lately, violently more candid lately.
Yeah,
actually.
Way, and like very environmental candid, like where the almost like cityscapes where the people play still an integral role, but sort of they're very integrated in the environment, especially like that recent motorcycle photograph. That was killer.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you. No, I was curious. I was curious what because we haven't spoken to you about this since I guess pushed away from street portraiture. And for me, I realized that I really enjoy not interacting with people. Like I really enjoy hovering in the background and just being sort of voyeuristic in a sense.
Yeah. And
I also realized that my photos got better. Like I was trying to figure out what I didn't like about my photos, and it was a lack of environment. Like I think I was trying to make that work when I was shooting portraits, and there were times where I could, but I wanted to use all of the elements of the city that I thought were so interesting. And so what I do is, where a lot of street photographers will forsake the intricacies of composition a little bit and focus on the rawness of what they're trying to share and the story they're trying to tell, which is fantastic. I love that too. I wanted to sort of, I guess what you're saying, romanticize a little bit, but insert people into the environment. Be like, think intentionally about the background, almost in a Cartier type of way. Think intentionally about the background. Wait there patiently and let people come into the scene, and let the right person come into the scene. Let the serendipitous person come in and make it complete.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting shift. I mean, I think you always had a very good sense, and I think some of it's maybe your filmmaking background of like, I oftentimes describe your photographs to people as cinematic, and I think even more so sort of the new way you've been shooting, and that you have a great idea of space and light and mood. And I think by working with more space, you're able to better build that mood. Because when you work in close and with street portraits, a lot of times it's like, it can be hard to build mood to the level I think you like. And I think even just back to like when you went out in the desert and did the sort of desert racing photo, the guys in the dune buggies and all that crazy
on
stuff.
The sand dunes.
Yeah, so like that like really stuck out to me in your work. And I think it's like, I guess just in how like me shooting with a longer lens and sort of choosing my light and where I want to photograph the person was like my way of better controlling the mood for myself, and sort of being able to give myself a specific aesthetic and a specific mood through the light and the specific space and sort of the removal of other things. I think by you sort of including more things, you've sort of better created, I think, the vision, at least I see in your work, it just seems like even more consistent in terms of work, and also sort of a more distinctive perspective amongst a lot of people there's a lot of people who shoot, like wide and close and sort of raw with street portraits. And then maybe also there's people who shoot like a lot of people who do like urban exploration or like just photographs of the city. Mm-hmm. But I think sort of it's interesting to see you fusing those two areas really well into these sort of candid moments where it's like the person plays a pivotal role, but they are a part of a greater scene.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, it's like the person becomes more interesting when put in their environment. And the environment becomes more interesting when a person is put in it. So it's a weird back and forth paradox. And I found that when I had to let go of the idea of feeling like I needed to interact with people, I think street photographers struggle with this in one way or another, where you either feel like you need to be super rogue Eric Kim in your face, or you need to speak to people and, have a nice conversation with them, get their story, be a little bit more photojournalistic. Both of those are perfectly valid approaches. But for me, I was like, okay, I love to be very introverted on my photo walks, but I love to, I want to not have to interact with people, because I really do enjoy them more that way. And I want to get as close to people as I feel like I need to get, and have the type of compositions that I'm after. And it's funny, when I let go of that, I've been so much happier with the photos I've created. I thought they would be the reverse. I thought I'd be like, crap, I'm not, because I'm trying not to get so close to people, that I'm sacrificing something. But I've been so much happier because I see I'm able to frame up the entire scene, just focus on framing up the entire scene and visualizing somebody coming into the spot, to just the right spot. And then I wait for them, and then it works, and it feels quite nice. So I've been enjoying that. And also breaking away from the street. Like, I feel like I couldn't take a picture of a sand dune,
Right.
And I'm sure it's nice for you, like with your work at the community journals, you get to venture into other territories. I mean, you get to go inside people's houses, and you get to go to people's, workshops and businesses and this sort of thing, and diversify what you're up to. And I think for me, it was like, okay, how do I do this? How do I not hold on so tightly to the idea of being a street photographer that I don't allow myself to branch out into other environments that I'm so interested in, especially in Utah. Holy crap.
Yeah.
And how do I do that, but also keep my stuff as curated as I want it to feel? And so for me, the common thread has just been the person, right? Maybe it's a little person, maybe it's a bigger person, but that's my common thread, and also my post-processing and stuff like that. So it's nice to hear how you perceive it, because I haven't been able to talk to a whole lot of people about how they perceive it yet, or really anybody. So it's nice to learn from you.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I've enjoyed the work, and I think it's always that thing, with social media and with digital now, you can see so much work, and sometimes it can be overwhelming, but I think it's also a good barometer of like when you see someone, or when you just see some work where you're like, this is sort of a departure from what I'm seeing everyone else doing. And it's not saying there's like no one else doing something similar, but I think it's like, it is sort of, I think your perspective seems more distinct through this, and sort of, I think it's easier for the audience to sort of understand it. And I think I also definitely understand where you're talking about, like for myself, with my work, getting to go into people's homes or doing these environmental portraits. It's kind of changed things, but I think it's also been interesting for me because I've sort of still been in a period of kind of questioning what I want my street work to be about now. And I've sort of been leaning towards doing a little bit with like very wide focal lengths, like 35 millimeter, and also shooting a little bit more 50, and just sort of rearranging what it is I want out of a street portrait. And like, I've made some that have what I want, and I've also sort of been enjoying the idea of, if not, hasn't quite been executed the way I'd like overall, like of something like pairing a portrait that's very wide and environmental with a portrait that's sort of really tight, like a very tight portrait.
Like a gallery.
Yeah, like just like a single pair of images, but like, and they don't even necessarily get posted at the same time, but like posted near each other, like back to back, and that like something that's just very environmental and then just super intimate and close and almost essentially no background.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of liking that. And I've also just been drawn way more to like faces rather than necessarily clothes and style as much, or perhaps like style in a much broader sense. I don't know. I've definitely been influenced by
maybe a deeper sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I think expanding that perspective, like I've been looking at the New York Times news section, the new look section since the passing of Bill Cunningham, and sort of the photographers they've employed there, and the new way they're kind of trying to approach the idea of style, or style almost as culture, almost as like a sense of a place and of a people, sort of epitomizing ideas or things like that. I don't know. That's kind of a tangent, but that's maybe a topic for another day.
I love it. I've always been fascinated by the way that you speak to style and fashion. Like I remember we were talking one day and you explained it to me as sort of something along the lines of it being, it's an outer expression of the inner self of the person. Like it speaks to who that person is. And we make these snap judgments about people, whether we realize it or not, based on what they're wearing from head to toe, what their shoes are like. And I love that. I love that awareness. It's a lot of fun. So one thing that, in regards to building a photography project, one thing that I think is important is to have a well-defined and meaningful direction, no matter what you're up to. Photography project, any project that you're doing, having a meaning and having a clear vision of what you're actually trying to create, for many different reasons that I'm sure we can all understand. But for you, what is the value on a practical level of making sure that you have a clear vision for what you're trying to create, a direction, and a meaning for the end goal of the work?
Well, I think sort of to make it both like macro and sort of a specific example, I always just sort of link it back to, for my job, a writer writes a story, and we have to create visuals that in some way, shape, or form reference or speak to, have some sort of intentionality in relation to the narrative. And without that, the photos can be beautiful, but they just feel out of place. And they just don't, for lack of a better word, they just don't really work. So I think it's like, without really thinking about like the framework you're going to work within, I think things also just fall apart. It's like when I first started doing street portraits, like I was shooting style and it was like a very focused thing. And there's leeway in it, but like I wasn't just going like, I'm going to take pictures of strangers, and if you apply no sort of framework to that, I think it's very hard to keep doing it. Because like as you work, you're like, this doesn't make sense with this isn't working. You sort of feel all over the place. And it's not to say that still doesn't happen, but it's like the further if you want to take a project a long way, you can't have a shaky foundation. It's like building a building, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
If you have a very narrow base, you can't expect to build a very, very tall building. I mean, there's probably architect people who are going to say something about that. You can. But as a theoretical example, I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, well, it's certainly, having a narrow base can certainly present challenges. I guess that's a conversation about pushing the boundaries. But okay. So having a solid foundation, I like that analogy of having if you're trying to build a tall tower that is beautiful, then if your foundation is built on sand, it's going to crumble at some point. And what I find is it crumbles slowly, like it's almost nefarious, like it's in the background. Then one day you wake up and you're like, I'm really not happy with what's going on here. And it's like you have to stay vigilant to what's going on in your head, how you feel about your project, how happy are you with this thing, because you could probably be happier, just a possibility, and maybe you're comfortable with it, but comfort doesn't always equal progress. Comfort is often antithetical to progress. That's the right word, right? Antithetical?
Yeah, sure. Sometimes that sounds fancy. Yeah, that sounds like a good fancy word for that.
Yeah. I mean, it really doesn't matter if it actually means the thing. You use big enough words that nobody understands, and you're fine because it just, oh my gosh, and wow. I'm sure that is, I'm sure that man, he has such elegant evenings. He sits down beside the fireplace and smokes his cigar this way for some reason. What are we talking about? Hey, so how do you make sure you stay on that path once you start? And this is where I think it would be interesting to think about collaboration, how maybe they can pull you in different directions that you don't mean to go.
Sure. I mean, I think, we'll just take an editorial story for an example because it's easy. You kind of have four perspectives going on. You have that of the photographer, and you have even more if I'm hiring someone, because then there's the photographer we're hiring, my direction as sort of an art director kind of role, the design team's ideas, the editor in chief's ideas, and the writer's ideas. So you can sort of have all these different perspectives, and they're all valid, but they're all more concerned with different parts of the project. So I think it can be challenging, and you sort of want to get buy-in at some point from people because, in the end, people have to agree that this makes sense for the story. So there's this tug of war, and sometimes with writers, they may think about the story in a very different way, and especially because with our weeklies, some of the writers are like they're journalists. So they may have a more specific idea or a more narrow view of sort of how to tell a story. And sort of working with me as a departure from the type of photojournalistic work they're used to, and more into this sort of stylized editorial way of storytelling that may be more nuanced than sometimes what they're used to, especially working in a small city where the common idea for photography is it just sort of illustrates a thing in a very simplistic and straightforward way.
Yeah.
And sort of trying to take a more subtle approach sometimes doesn't really get the best response because it takes a little bit more effort to digest.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting though is that for the right crowd, I think it's more digestible. Like when the person picks up the thing and they're engaging with something that's very polished, I think that makes it more digestible for the right person, but maybe less digestible for particularly people internally who are used to a status quo. But also, I guess, I don't know, who in the outside world would it be less digestible to?
I mean, I guess it's just if you have an image that's not super straightforward. Like an example I always bring up when the writers talk about things is like there's a guy that makes shoes, right? I think a lot of people think the best photo of this is like him making shoes, him holding a shoe and him. Whereas if the whole narrative is around this structure, how is the photo adding a lot of value if it just literally shows here is man we were talking about and here is shoe he makes we were talking about? I think sometimes people can be a little overly simplistic in how they think of like that, and in some ways, right, like that is a more digestible image, and that like it obviously takes the 2 points that are being made, puts them into one image, done. You're not doing anything more conceptual or kind of different. You're not having to include multiple images. You're sort of telling the story in a very simplistic, easily digestible way with one image that encapsulates the very basis and sort of basics of the article.
So do you feel like they're trying that sometimes they're trying to approach it from a technical, straightforward, illustrative kind of way? Like they're just trying to show the shoe, that this is the shoe the guy creates and this is him making that shoe, and perhaps you're trying to get a more emotional aesthetic across. Sure,
yeah. And I mean, sometimes I'll be the first to admit, sometimes maybe the other approach is better for some stories. Perhaps, but I think some of it too is, I think about this a lot, is it's hard to be better than everyone at something. Like if you sort of approach how you're going to tell a story the exact same way everyone else does, it's hard to do that better than everyone else ever has if you're sort of using the same toolkit, thinking of it in the same way, and framing it in the same way. Whereas if you can frame it in a different manner, it's sort of like comparing an apple and an orange. Like if you're comparing two apples, people are like, well, this apple is just better on these qualities. And it's like, it's easy to write down these comparison points. But when you have two things, we'll just say an apple and a shoe, suddenly it's like they're kind of incomparable. And I think by trying to create a visual narrative that isn't how it's been represented before, at least for this particular person, story, object, you're sort of bringing a new perspective to the table that, isn't just a simple comparison of sort of megapixels and, basics of lighting and things like that. You're sort of bringing a different perspective in. And I think that's where the value is for any creative, is sort of perspective. Because if I think you take how anyone does something, it's probably not just that they have the best technical skill and that's why people follow them. I think in general, they have technical proficiencies, but they also have a very distinct perspective.
Well, for me, it seems to be like the best art is a beautiful, harmonious marriage between technicality and emotionality.
Yeah,
they find this beautiful middle ground where it's punchy. It's punchy. It punches you in the heartstrings, but it does that through having a technical ability and an understanding of the rules and the guidelines of how we interact with art and how our eyes perceive colors and all that fun stuff. And that's how that's the marriage that helps you tell a story. Momentary interlude, because Will had to fix his lighting situation, and it looks infinitely better now. This is beautiful. Thank you, Will.
Okay, it's getting there.
Thank you for your attention to detail.
Next time we'll really blow you away. I'm going to have like 3 light setup going on instead of stealing a lamp from the other room and kind of pointing it at a wall, except my walls are like, well, you can see what my walls are like, so they don't really reflect light well. So
next time we need some anamorphic lens flares as well. Can we get some of that?
Do you think they make like little attachments for webcams? Like,
if you go to China, I'm sure.
Will I get an anamorphic lens on my webcam?
Yeah, we're gonna figure that out because that's got to happen. Okay, where were we at? So we're talking. Oh yes, being more diplomatic. Have you had to learn how to better communicate with others in a creative capacity when there's emotions going around and you really want you really want the image to be, I don't know, cropped a certain way. You really want you really want the particular image where the hand is doing just this a very specific thing that you love, and they're like, no, we need this one.
Yeah, I mean, I won't be facetious to some of it. Like, I do sort of being the one who takes the photographs and us not having a photo editor for a lot of my work. I kind of choose what I send to people, and I do sort of self-select a little bit to sort of ward off certain things, but I also like to give people plenty of options and realize, like, from a reasonable standpoint, what do they really need? So, I mean, I think learning to work with a team and then learning to work with editors sometimes that you may not agree with, and sort of that want to tell a story a different way. I mean, it's definitely one of those things where what I try to do is be very proactive in the sense that I try to get their opinions early on and include them in the process. And this goes all the way to the photo subject too. I try to involve people early. I try to share the ideas. I think the worst thing you can do is sort of hoard your ideas and then just kind of be like, I don't know what I'm going to do. But really you do, like, just let people know at the beginning. Because, I mean, even if you're going to do it anyways, if they disagree, people are a lot more open at the beginning. And also, I just say always be open to concepts that, some of our writers are less willing or less interested in sharing ideas. But some of our writers, especially some of the people who kind of have come up in the newer age of journalism and sort of multimedia and having to do a little photography themselves, I think it's easy as the person who's the photographer to go, I have the best ideas. No one else can ever come up with an idea that's actually good and possible to execute. But we had one story where we were doing something on bat researchers and we couldn't take them into a cave. So we sort of had to shoot this idea, and they had this idea of shooting them a certain way. And like, they didn't know how to technically do it. And they were respectful of me in the sense that they were like, hey, this may not be possible. But it ended up being an amazing idea, and it was like a killer cover, and it did it was very good for us. And it was something I didn't think of. Mm-hmm. So I think the hardest thing is sort of having your own distinct voice while also always being open to what people may bring to the table. And that's hard, like, especially when it comes from a lot of different sides. And I think it's easy to just say, yeah, collaboration, easy. But you do have a lot of personalities going on. But I just think being upfront, sharing your ideas as soon as you have them, queuing in as many of the parties as possible so that everyone has a handle on it. Because it's easy to be like, well, I talked to the writer, but did you talk with the designer? But did you also talk with the EIC, the editor-in-chief? Like, have you communicated with all of these people, because they may bring up concerns? You may want to photograph. I've had things where I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And they're like, well, actually, it's not really about the people. It's more about the product, or it's more about this side of things. And you may be like, well, visually, we really need to focus on this, and you guys reach a compromise in the middle. But sometimes it may be you're like, you just assumed this story is people heavy when actually it's all product heavy and no one's even really quoted much. So I think it saves you a lot of pain, sort of getting as much information from the people as you can. Kind of act. I always think of myself as like, try to act dumb, like ask dumb questions. I think this is really important. Like, and I don't mean that in a way of like asking irrelevant questions, but like ask more questions than you think. Like,
what color is this?
Yeah, I mean, there can be simple things, literally, like, did the writer already go to the space? What does the space look like? Are we going to shoot this in the studio, or does it make sense to go to the location? Like, there's a lot of information you can glean from asking people, just simple questions about the subject and simple questions about the story that may radically change how you're going to approach it visually. And I think that's when you're collaborating with people too, you have to understand their vision and the part that they sort of have to execute well. Because if you just sort of only focus on your section, how are you going to sort of work as a group? Because in the end, right, the story has words, it's designed, and then there's an editor, and then there's also the photos. So it's like you have all of these components, and if one person's just sort of working in their own world, even if, say, it's the editor and they edit out the part that sort of needs to be in there for the visuals to make sense, suddenly, everything starts falling apart.
I think one thing that you spoke to there, which is interesting, is accepting that it's a collaborative. Maybe you didn't specifically speak to this, but this is what, like, it came to my head as you were speaking to it, because I'm somebody who I operate on a solo level with almost all of my creative things. And I've had to learn how to shift that dynamic because I'm working with my wife more now. And it's beautiful. And I realize that I have to accept that this is no longer a solo project. This is now a collaborative project. It must be approached differently. And I think that what I try to do is I try to still maintain that solo feel when it is clashing violently with the collaboration that needs to take place. And I love that you mentioned going to people at the beginning of the process and along the way as well, but specifically at the beginning of the process, because you can integrate all of those things, whether you agree with them or not, or what you think about them. You're able to process all of that before it all begins. and you can choose what parts of that and how you want to integrate that into your end product, as opposed to missing all of that at the beginning. And then everybody's coming to you with critiques, and you're like, no, I put all this time into this. I already have an emotional investment. Now I want it to be this way. So there's a strong emotional attachment that can make you insane and close your mind off to their critiques. If you do it in the beginning, you avoid a lot of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, I think you also hit on a really good point, which is like another layer I have to deal with being full-time in a company, is like, on top of everyone else, there's also the product itself and sort of the voice we're trying to have for the product and the audience it's trying to reach. And, I try to push boundaries visually in some ways, but there is also sort of the end reader, the advertiser, the people
digestibility.
Yes. Like, is this right for this? Like, does this, and I think with visual language, like, you can push things farther than people expect and they'll be okay with it. But like, there's just these different stages of things. And, like when I first, in that collaborative environment, I came from doing street portraiture where I set all the rules. Like, it was my blog, there weren't advertisers. I wasn't worried about people's perspectives or what kind of people I photograph. Like, it was solely and completely my vision. Which
is crucial for many creators.
Yes. And I think it's crucial even now that I've moved on, like, that perspective. And I mean, I've, just because you collaborate well doesn't mean I haven't had drag out screaming matches, to be honest, with editors I've had in the past.
Yeah.
Because you do, right? Like, you do have to retain a core of yourself, but you also have to realize when you're sort of just fighting to fight, and when it really, I think, has sort of, there's more validity to your claim. Yeah. Maybe.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting stuff. I also think that it's important to create a wall, like a stone wall in your head between a solo project and a collaborative project, because the end result can be different from both of those. And what I mean by that is that the end result can be equally as good from both types of projects, but you get something from the end result of a collaborative project that you don't get from a solo project. You get something from a solo project that you don't get from a collaborative project. Either my wife's home or somebody's breaking into my house. My dog's barking. So let's hope I don't die on the stream. But if so, Will, can you post this for me?
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So a good example of this is I watched a documentary about a single scene from Star Wars, and the documentary was about all of the departments it goes through for this single scene to be made. There's a fight scene at the end of the movie, and it was amazing. I was very inspired by it, and it went through. I mean, you're talking about having a small team. This went through hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people, for a scene that's, I don't know, 3 minutes long, right? And so you duplicate that across a film and you have a feature-length film. That's how it works. But what can happen with collaborative projects, and I would be very interested to hear your thoughts on this, is it can become muddy and it can lose its vision because there's too many hands in the pot. But what can also happen, and I think what did happen with Star Wars, even though people have criticized the prequels endlessly, is that it does have a clear, defined vision, even though there are hundreds of people making decisions about what the end result ends up looking like. And there's a person for every job. Like they fragment jobs in the cinema world. It's like you have a guy whose only job is to hold the camera. You have a guy whose only job is to pull focus. You have a guy whose only job is to work the crane. You have a guy whose only job is to operate the camera at the top of the crane. You have a guy whose only job is to animate the lava. This person only does the rotoscoping. And so it's much more fragmented than the guerrilla version of YouTube video making or street photography that we do. So
Yeah.
yeah, but what
to say the least.
what came out of that was a pretty beautiful example of how having a massive team of people allows you to create a massive project that turns out to have a clear narrative and a clear story, and it does all the things it's trying to do. Whereas you think that you have to get rid of that if you have collaboration, but there is a right way to collaborate. It just involves communication, which us creatives tend to have a very hard time with. But I'm curious what you think about having a lot of hands in the pot and how to avoid it becoming a muddy mess or a corporate feeling, systematic kind of conveyor belt kind of feeling thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think it really links back to the talk about a foundation. And I think it's sort of getting buy-in from people early about courses of action. And even if those courses drift and float, but I think like the more early buy-in you can have and the more everyone agrees at the beginning, the less you have to sort of fight with this sort of later stage. It's sort of like getting sign off on a cover from our publisher. Like, you get it to them early so that if, they are the final say, if they don't like it, you can reassess as a team, rather than showing it to them at the end. And it's the same with working with a team. It's like if I go and photograph something and don't consult anyone, and then I just show that to them the day before we go to press and we're like laying things out and they go, this doesn't make any sense with the story at all. And I go, well, it kind of does, but maybe it really doesn't. You're just kind of, you're screwed. Like there's no way of kind of fixing it. So I think and I think too, like more hands do get muddied. I mean, I think most of our jobs are very compartmentalized. And I think the current team I have, everyone understands the boundaries of their job while also being willing to provide helpful information to other people without too often really overreaching. And I think that's sort of the line. It's just like with the writers, I may know something about the topic or something and just say like, hey, like this perspective's kind of interesting. Like it's as long as it's set up under the expectations that they're not going to suddenly have to rewrite the piece and I'm going to be angry with them if they don't, take this advice. It's the same with photos. Like, it's like, you never know where an incredible idea will come from, whether like in you or out. And sometimes it's someone giving you an idea that you don't use, but then fosters what you want to go the opposite way, or it gives you this sort of another set of eyes into it. And it also varies. Like one thing that's sort of, we have, these editorial stories and these stories that are writing based. We also have a section that we've been cultivating that I've been working on mainly by myself, which is like a photo essay section. And literally, like, we have just a few, sentences written about the piece, and it's just mainly photographs. Those pieces, and like you're speaking to, like, those I think of as much less collaborative. People may give, like, themes, but, like, how we carry them out and the way we construct the narrative is much more just solely driven by me, versus these pieces where we are, there's a distinct narrative. And some pieces, are very long and the photos play a smaller role. And some pieces are very short and photos really help supplement the narrative. So it's sort of like, never being, the person who thinks they're, too big for their shoes and kind of not overreaching. But it can be hard too. It's like sometimes you want to tell a story a certain way, but the way they need to write it is different. And it's like you have to sort of understand where your place is in the cycle, and kind of, not to beat a dead horse, but it's really just about like everybody getting together at the beginning and agreeing on at least a basic framework, so one person doesn't just shoot out way over here. And then it also shifts though, because like, especially with the daily, with the weekly, stories shift, especially news pieces. So it's also like keeping in communication. So it's like forming that foundation, and then like at pivotal points, maintaining communication. across the platform.
Would you say that you dedicate as much time to communicating as you do to taking photos and conceptualizing?
Yeah, I mean, between meetings and sort of all those steps, and between communicating, I guess the last step I've still left out is like communicating the ideas to the photo subject, right? Because even though we're not being hired, right, this isn't, commercial work where you're being hired to photograph them, thus like you have to share everything. Working editorial is a weird balance. It's like they're not your client, so you want to execute your vision, but they have to buy into it. Like you can't make someone make a photo they don't want to make. Like if they don't want to do it, they just won't do it. So with them, I take the exact same approach in that.
Well, you can in North Korea.
Yeah.
But you know what? We have liberty here in the great US of A.
Yes. There's no, my photography studio doesn't double as a torture chamber.
Okay. That was another question I was going to ask.
I know you thought it did, but
I just wanted to break down some of the emotional barriers before we got to that question, because that's a tough one.
Yeah.
Is your work environment a torture chamber?
Yeah. Generally not. I mean, for some people, maybe they feel like it is having their picture taken, but I try to alleviate that as much as I can. But yeah, so I mean, I'm totally like lost on this thought, but I'm going to wrap back around to it.
Sorry, I brought in North Korea and it went haywire.
I know, it's just like all of a sudden I'm just way over here now in North Korea land, and I need to get back to America. I mean, I'm swooping back over here, but it takes a long time to swim across the ocean.
I hear that you can get in with the Chinese at the border and like have a little exchange that like under the radar. You go through the river and into the woods and stuff.
Now that I've made it to China, I know back where we were now.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay. So sort of working with. Thank you for rescuing that.
China is enlightening.
James went for that rescue mission to save me from my own befuddlement. But working, and it's like I just keep repeating myself, but it sort of comes back to when you like, I try to reach out to the subject as soon as I can. One, because you have to get the shoot scheduled on their time and they're not paying for it, so sometimes it can be a little challenging from just like a real life standpoint. But also more importantly, it's like I really like to share images with people before they come. Like I like to share the idea, because some ideas, especially things that I try to do for the Business Journal, for some of the publications, like they're not the traditional way that it would be treated. So they're used to like, if I just tell them show up, they're not going to be ready for what I want. And if someone's sort of surprised by something, it's just like for a human being, like if a dog jumps out and scares you, you're more likely to be wary of the dog than if you see the dog walking towards you from 100 yards away and you just see him calmly walking towards you.
And it starts talking to you. It's like, hi, buddy.
Yeah. I mean, then you're like, am I tripping? What's going on? But I think it's just that same thing of like getting them the images earlier, because in the end, a portrait or even photographic product is a collaborative process. And by showing them your ideas, showing them you've thought about the process, it's allowed me to get a lot more time with them. And then I also share my portfolio to give them idea of how I work and to explain why I might need a little bit more time than a traditional photojournalist would to execute the shoot. So it's sort of, I think, crosses each barrier level of, in the collaborative process. Even if you feel like, hey, I'm a wedding photographer, I just work on my own, you're always having to collaborate because you're working with your client. There's always someone. I mean, me and you did the thing that was like the least collaborative, which was like street portraiture for ourselves, but it was for an internet audience. So in a strange sense, there was still some sense of,
you're collaborating. You're collaborating with your audience. What does your audience want? That's an interesting point.
That's definitely way harder to gauge than like when you sit down with someone at a table. But I think like it's easy to think in that solo mindset when in fact, like anything you create, right, the person who's consuming it is in a sense a collaborator, or if anyone's paying you to do any kind of work, you're having to collaborate with them. So I think it's sort of one of those things where no matter what area, what creative field you work in, unless you're like, speaking of enlightenment, unless you're just like a monk meditating out by yourself in the middle of the woods, but then maybe you have a dope Instagram account and you're actually really famous.
It's true. That's true. Which is common.
Yeah. I mean, that's the future now.
Yeah. That's the thing that all those California kids are doing at this point, I think. But,
yeah.
So have you had a particularly tough project?
Yeah. So the project, I guess it was really just a single photo assignment, but it turned into 3 shoots over 3 weeks,
Okay.
which is like a long time for a weekly pub type shoot to go on for. And it had to deal with a conflict on several levels, and that the sort of people writing the piece didn't necessarily have a conflict. I had a conflict with the way the publisher, who in the end has the final call, wanted the piece represented, contrasted very strongly with what the individual wanted and was willing to do. So we sort of ran into this issue where I also didn't clear everything with everyone, and I just took what I could, and they were like, we want to do, I really want to do a group shot. I don't want to be shown by myself. Like, my team needs to be shown and supported and blah, 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 blah. So I did that shoot, come back, and then my editors go, that's not what we need. We need this. And then I come back to them and they say, I'm not willing to do this. So we ran through this back and forth, all of these shoots, and finally reached this compromise. But, you know, a lot of that could have been avoided if I just really, everyone had communicated to the team, and we had communicated with the publisher, and everyone had sort of understood this person is not going to do this. They will not be on the cover by themselves unless I take a picture and say, I promise this won't go on the cover. And then we just lie and put it there. There was no sort of working around the structure. Whereas my publisher felt almost the antithesis way, where they're just like, this has to be this way for the cover. So it did become one of these things where, you know, going to the higher ups, and I think as a creative, it's like learning to explain yourself and not just sort of push everything away and clam up. I think it's hard sometimes dealing with people who sort of don't understand your vision or don't understand the technical issues or the personnel issues or the subject issues you're running into. So I think it's always sort of important to go to them and explain it to them yourselves and sort of try to come to them with a solution that maybe meets in the middle. So we ended up photographing like them as the key person with another person in the frame, but less important, and sort of getting away from the original narrative, and the writer sort of restructured things. So sometimes things just get messy.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was curious how patience played, like having a patient character played a role in that process for you. You're a pretty laid back guy, but did you have to sort of force yourself to go, okay, we're going to figure this out?
You got to get that yoga breathing. You got to be like,
okay.
And then you go home and you scream and yell, and then you go back to work and you go, let's figure this out, guys. I mean,
my theory is that you just repress it for years,
and then it just explodes out like a volcano one day.
Exactly.
That's why I don't have hair. It's just all of stress.
Okay.
Then it just all falls off.
Oh, I never realized that. Wow.
That's actually what it is.
I'm sorry. I mean, that must be really difficult, and I know a good counselor. But yeah, no, you could repress it, and then one day you could just like run over a kid with a car, and then it's all better. That's one way to approach it, but there are ramifications to that. It's maybe not the best strategy.
Probably not.
Yeah, but a strategy.
I mean, I do think it is like, as a creative, you feel ownership over what you create, and it's sort of your, you know, for me, photography is my passion, and like making portraits is my passion, and like, you don't want to compromise, or you get frustrated that like other people's visions are overwhelming your vision, or you're having to settle. And I mean, sometimes you do have to settle. Like, I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that, there hasn't been a time where I've had to settle into a vision that's maybe not 100% what I wanted. I think overall I've been able to manage it in a way where my vision's respected enough and it makes enough sense within the context where it's usually used. But I mean, it can be challenging to go from the subject who's like yelling at you about not wanting to do it one way to then your publisher who's yelling at you for not wanting to do it the way the subject wants. And you sort of, you just have to keep a cool head, because in the end too, like, it's your job to make the photo. So like, you can be mad and angry, but you have to resolve the problem. None of the other people are going to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of it is sort of being a mediator sometimes, and being able to explain things to people who maybe aren't creatives or aren't interested in, necessarily the technical or the nitty gritty of why you want to do it one way,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
kind of have to navigate that world,
I
whether it
think,
be commercial or editorial.
yeah, I
Whatever.
think people, I think people underestimate the importance of, like, I guess I would call it the layman's tongue, the ability to break concepts down for people. A lot of times people don't work well together because they don't understand, they don't nobody has painted a picture for them of what things are supposed to look like in when they're working with somebody in a realm that they don't find themselves in normally. So if they're if they're a business person and you're trying to take a portrait of them, they don't. The only interaction they may have had in the past was something very specific, right? You had somebody take a portrait of them in a very traditional kind of way, and you come in there and you're trying to be all artistic, and then they're like, all right, let me go to what I know, because this is where I feel comfortable, and I have to be competent because I'm a business person and this is how I do business. And you have to come in there and explain to them and be able to break down to them and paint a picture, give them a narrative, compel them to go along the journey with you. And I think a lot of people skip that part. They'll do some discount version of that, which is really, you can avoid, like, I really think you can avoid a lot of metaphorical fistfights in life if you were a bit more intentional about how you communicated things. Some people are just insane, but for the most part.
I completely agree. I mean, I've got people to do things that people did not think they would do. Like, and a lot of that is being upfront in certain ways. And also it's just like photographs. Like, whenever I work with a client, whether they're hiring me for freelance or it's for my editorial work that I do for my job, a lot of it is like, if people send me text about the mood or the look they want, they don't send me photos. I ask for photos, and I just ask for photos until I get photos. Because, and it's the same for me. Like, I always supply people with photographs. I never just like write this long, it could be an amazing like piece of descriptive literature that I write that's like super compelling, but like words just mean different things to different people, even amongst photographers. Like, moody means a lot of things, like dark, even high key,
minimalistic.
Like all those terms have very different frameworks. And, having worked with a lot of different art directors and things, like, the biggest thing is to always ask for specificity. And then when you're supplying images to people, like, I give them a mood board, or I give them a selections of photos. And I may say, like, well, some of these photos are just references for poses, and some of these may be references for the lighting, but I try to build an overall mood. And I think, like, both for showing the client and also showing my editorial team, the writers aren't as versed in a visual language. So, you and me, James, we may be able to just kind of talk through an idea and kind of understand how we're going to visually present it, especially too, is like, we know each other's work. So we'd be like,
there's a camaraderie.
Yes. And there's like a shared language. It may not be perfect all the time. And I still would think that like showing either of us an image would still be more effective, or a set of images, to truly encapsulate sort of having a shared understanding. But I think, I always share photos with people for your editorial subjects, for your commercial clients, for, the editorial team that I work with, because it gives people that direct reference point and helps bridge that gap of sort of a technical language barrier, which I think, like you touched on before, is like a reason why a lot of things fail, is people get mad because they're like, this isn't what we talked about. But really, y'all talked about it, you just didn't share the same language when you talked about it. And you guys set different expectations, and you guys had different meanings of like even the word lifestyle photograph, right? Like, that means different things to different people.
Yeah. There has to be a pretty intentional breakdown of of concepts and ideas that lead to the idea that you're trying to create, I think. So, and what has been a particularly interesting project for you?
Should it be more collaborative, or can it be more personal, single leaning concept?
What's one? Okay, yeah. What's one where the presence of other voices helped it be interesting and come out on the end as something really special?
Okay. An example I think that sort of had to involve multiple people and sort of originated as sort of two people's ideas was we took a protest and we recorded audio from different people and then supplied very tight, intimate portraits of those people. And I think sort of combining this sort of skill set of the writer having a good ability of sort of pulling stories from people and creating that humanity, and then pairing it with a visual presentation of sort of very intimate portraits that's sort of, we wanted to find a way to tell the narrative that felt personal, because I think the one thing with protests is it can be easy to think of groups as sort of mob mentality, like there's just a group of people. And I think that also makes it easy for the side that doesn't like them to dehumanize them and just think of them as this sort of mob or group that they disagree with. And I think it's a lot harder when you sit down with someone one-on-one and you guys have a conversation. Like, I think people walk away either respecting their perspective more, or they're not going to be as ugly about it because, you know, it's this sort of individualistic experience. So we want to take that idea of like, what if they had to sit down with the, you know, across the table from the person who's protesting, by doing these sort of very, I guess, like almost like Martin Schaller-esque portraits of just sort of very simple backgrounds, very tight, not at all interested necessarily in the protest photos that, you know, there's incredibly compelling protest photographs, but like we were joking about earlier, Greenville is not a place of sort of these frenzied, furied protests that have visuals that they're usually pretty staid and controlled. So it's sort of like the visuals almost don't match the narrative in a weird sense, even though it's like what's actually happening. But like, I think the dissenting voices, they can just sort of feel like there's nothing going on. So by sort of creating this pairing, it was sort of a way to bring in how the writers like to tell stories with how I like to create visuals. And it paired really well together in a way where the writer taking a quick snapshot wouldn't work photographically, and me interviewing them, I guarantee you, would not pull the sort of ideas. And then our editor comes in with sort of selecting the sound bites and building that narrative and deciding whose stories to choose and sort of compiling the work that we each did individually and saying, like, you know, how is this going to work together, and sort of collaborating across that platform to create something that lives in a digital space that isn't a video necessarily, but sort of exists in this interesting space in between things. So I thought that was an interesting project.
That's a perfect example of all of the stuff we've been talking about kind of coming to a head, because for one, that's a very meaningful project. And I see the meaning in it because I think we need to be taking people who are political, people who are speaking about political things, people who have passions about political things, and making them personal, because sweet Lord, we need that right now in our country. But so there's the meaning, and there's the, you know, it started with a firm foundation, and it's a good example of how you can take two people from two different, or a few people from different disciplines, pull them together into something collaborative that's really special that you couldn't do quite the same way if it was a solo project.
Sure. And I think it also is one of those things where it sort of shows, just like you were talking about the compartmentalization, but this is just on like a micro scale, like the compartmentalization of, you know, making that consistent thing for that movie, for the Star Wars movie, for that fight scene. Like, it's on this micro scale of like, okay, like, it's also an example too of each person had a way they wanted to tell the story. And instead of, the photographs detracting from their narrative, it enhances it. Instead of their storytelling distracting from my photographs, it enhances it. It's sort of one of those things where it's an example where you can really work, and like, these portraits are like exactly how I would do the portraits, even if we weren't going to tell the narrative this way, because that's how I thought about the narrative. And for the writer, they wanted to create this humanized element, and they didn't want to have to paraphrase, like rewrite these people's narratives. So it kind of gave us a non-traditional platform piece. And obviously too, it's right, getting the support. Like, we weren't producing a piece that could go into print. So our publishers and our editors needed to be okay with the resources being allocated towards something that, wasn't going to our, the print product, which is sort of considered the premium part of our business.
It's interesting because you were speaking to it complementing each other, right? Your photography, their narrative focus complementing your photography focus. And when you have a good team, and when you have a team that was, I think, selected well, and I also think that the leader, which is something we haven't spoke about too much today, but the leader is highly important in helping something be cohesive and reach its vision, because you're going to have people who want something to go this way and want something to go this way. Sometimes you can't reach a conclusion, and you end up in a really bad place where everyone hates everybody if you don't have a leader to step in and say, okay, this is what we're doing. Somebody to make a final decision, say, I respect everything that you guys are doing, but this is what we're going to do. Also, it's when you have a nice team like that works well together, you're able to create a meal of sorts that's like, you have like fish, and fish, you can pair it with rice, but maybe you don't want to pair it with like spaghetti, because that would detract from the fish, and the fish would detract from the spaghetti, even though both of those are glorious things. Particularly with really I like them when there's like a lot of meatballs, and that'll be our next conversation. It'll be 3 hours long, just about meatballs.
Meatballs, yeah, easily 3 hours.
How to pair meatballs with fish. That's exciting. Do some food photography. We can get our friend Andrew in on that, right?
There you go.
Beautiful. We'll make the first
collaboration.
Talk about collaboration and elevating your artistic dish, right? So what was I saying? Oh yeah, when everything clicks together, when you have the right team, and it's really hard to do on a big scale, I think, but when you have the right, nice little small team that can feed off of each other and elevate the entire process and the entire end result into something special, I think that's a fantastic thing.
Sure. And I mean, I think you did hit on a good point, which is the negative side of collaboration, which is when you get too many hands in the kitchen. It's just like, I think the other issue is sometimes when there's too many hands in the kitchens, it happens when some of those hands weren't in on the foundation. Like, for example, a publisher or an EIC, and maybe just the writer and the photographer talk about something, go and do it. And then when those hands do get involved, it can really mess up the process and sort of skew everything, because the writer interviewed for a certain type of story, the photographer photographed for a certain presentation, and suddenly you're having to take those materials and make something new with it, and it just doesn't quite fit together right. So I do think it's one of those things where it's like, be careful starting creative projects that involve way too many people. Especially if you're not used to that and you don't have a good structure for it and you haven't worked with a lot of those people. Because, it's like when me and you started doing, some of our photography videos together, there's just two of us. So it was like it wasn't that hard. Like, just
we both do basically the same thing as well.
Yeah. And we just had to agree to get together physically and record something.
Right.
right? Like, but if we'd invited like three more people in different genres in, like just simply from like a scheduling standpoint, suddenly it would have been way harder.
Yeah,
Like just to
yeah.
get to like the most baseline basic thing is like, if everyone can't be there, it can't happen.
Hmm.
So I think it's one of those things where it's like understanding how many people need to be involved in a project and like understanding the scale of those things and the benefits of adding more perspective. It's like a photo shoot, like the benefits of having a stylist and a set designer and someone do wardrobe and assistant. And there's shoots we do, like our big fashion shoots, where all those things help so much because of what we're going to try to produce. There's other times where if I'm trying to take an intimate portrait of, a widow who, lost her husband, like those things can be detrimental to the process. And it's sort of understanding that, like, a makeup artist standing in and dabbing them is just essentially ruining your chance to make this intimate connection. And you're trying to create this intimate portrait. And those are the moments where, having an assistant adjusting your light is even distracting. Like you need to understand, and this is impossible just to know. And it's not like, we all make mistakes with this, but when a small team works and when you need to bring people's perspectives in or expertise to really add value, and when what you're trying to create, it's like street portraits. Like it wouldn't make a lot of sense if suddenly I was like, hey, James, I'm just going to start putting my street portraits with your street portraits, and we're just going to stick them all together on a site without, really thinking about, do they make sense together? Are we going to change the way we shoot? Are we going to think about how they're going to interact? Are we going to discuss on a regular basis what we're posting, how they're going to interact with each other, and our post-processing styles, and, all these things? Like,
We'll just call it jameswill.com.
Exactly, right? And it's like understanding what things need more people or what things have to have more people, and then what things just start to get weighed down. And I think everyone sees it in, different mediums and different things where sort of things may be technically more perfect because more people are involved, but they lose sort of a sense of soul and sort of a sense of creative capital value, coolness.
Well, I think another huge issue that you can run into is when you get too many people in there, it starts to feel a little bit like the government. Everything gets weighed down and everything moves really slowly. Decisions can't be made, and you can overfill the boat of creativity, and it starts sinking, and it's not nimble, right?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, there's definitely that thing of, the larger the group of people involved. It's just like the photo essay section compared to when we're photographing a cover. For the photo essays, I get approval from the EIC that a topic is acceptable, and that's it. There's no writers involved. There's nothing else. There's no scheduling conflicts. There's no concern about, well, we got the photos in, but the story isn't in, or there's no concern. Sometimes you shoot something and then the writer comes back and they go, oh, there's just no story here. You don't have these concerns. There's essentially two parties. And then once you get just that basic acceptance, it essentially turns into a one-man show. And it's much easier to be nimble and adjust your schedule and sort of pump out those products. And that's exactly why I wanted to start that section, was to have this sort of free reign creative time for myself within the publications to explore topics I was interested in and not have to rely on just photographing the stories that the writers bring to the table.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The last thing I want to talk to you about is how important is it for you to maintain your solo project in street photography? How does that keep you from going insane and running through the town with a samurai sword killing people?
Yeah, I mean, that's a weird one, because I mean, there's definitely been a struggle lately to maintain it at a great level, and it's definitely affected me some. Some of it's like I go out and shoot, but sometimes I don't make the photos because it's like the sort of amount of creative capital I feel like is just pumped into what I have to do for my job sometimes.
You feel creatively dry.
Yeah, I think sometimes too, because I have the unique position with my job where I do sort of, I feel like I get to interject my creative voice a lot in those products. And by having to do that and by doing that, it makes it harder to produce the personal work. But I also think like my personal work is crucial and has always been crucial to my perspective in photography and sort of how I've differentiated myself in the marketplace, because I came into photography through this perspective that is different and that didn't generate any sort of income at first, and was like, I wasn't trying to shoot weddings in the trendy way that makes you money. Like it was something that didn't concern the monetary side of things, which I always think in terms of like building your perspective is essential, because your voice is going to be determined for you if you're having to just create, or you're just choosing to create under the strictures of where you live, especially if you're in a small place like Greenville, where creatively there's not a ton of people that are just like really pushing boundaries visually. And there's not a lot of clients looking for that kind of work. So I think it's one of those things where it informs things. And I think the introduction of the photo essay is a way for me to carry my personal work. Like, for instance, we did a section on Artisphere, which is a local arts festival in Greenville. And we literally did like a street style of Artisphere. And I literally just photographed it how I would do my personal work. So it's sort of fine. I've sort of found a way through photo essays to engage some of the ways I like to tell stories. Another sort of way we did it was we went to South Carolina Comic-Con, and although we didn't do street photography in the normal sense, like I would run around and pull people who did cosplay costumes, sort of photograph them in a very dramatic lit way that sort of has a cinematic theatrical feel, because I felt like that's what it represented. But I thought like they were in a sense of style camp. So even though I was using lighting and sort of producing it in a different way, I was still doing the thing I've always liked to do, which is what romanticize and sort of remove people from their original environment a little bit. So I think it's one of those things where I've tried to grow the way I can execute that more pure perspective across this platform. And then also I think, though, it's sort of been a yin and yang of like the more polished and sort of more way I work with lighting for work sort of made me in a way want my street portraits to have even more of a stylized, maybe romanticized feel, I guess, or just like I'm even more intentional with the lighting, and I'm more specific about the gestures, and I want it to start, I want the line to be blurred between sort of, is this person a friend? Is this person a stranger? Is this person a photo subject for editorial work? Like, I don't want there to feel like there's a boundary. And maybe that's how like my personal work gets to, in a sense, continue itself through my professional work. But then I also do think there's like an important feeling of like going out, getting back to your roots, producing that work. So I don't know. It's a strange dynamic for me. Like I think they inform each other. And I think I haven't done as much street work, but in a sense, I've been able to push parts of my job into the realm of what I like to do. And I think that's like an important thing too, in that sometimes you have to create the work for yourself, either within, the company you work for or other things. And sometimes you may not get paid for it. You just may be more work for you. Like the photo essay section is just more work for me in one sense, in that it's just a brand new section that's expected to be produced every month or every 2 weeks. And, it can be a little overwhelming, but also to gain more creative control, sometimes you have to make something that people aren't necessarily asking for. But if your company says, yeah, sure, you can do that, I think it can open doors in any creative field.
It's almost like you think in that situation that adding on another project would make things harder and it would be too much to tolerate. But if it's something you're excited about, I found that adding on that extra bit of like literal work can make you enjoy your job more. So it's not the work so much as the passion for the work. And so if you include that, that makes you feel more of a connection to your job. You feel more okay with doing the other projects that you're less excited about.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think it helps kind of control the burnout, even though ironically you're like putting in more effort. I think it sort of fulfills you. And I mean, I still do street work. I think it's just like I am in a weird transitional zone of like what my street work means. And I think the groups and sort of the idea of style and sort of outsider culture, because I think in the end, like my style photographs are more about people being outsiders or being part of these sort of less than normal groups. And I think that's pushed into like wanting to do these photo essays that maybe delve more specifically into these groups and into these sort of subcultures, and sort of like how you felt restricted by saying like, okay, I have to like go up to people and make street portraits, and that's how it is. It's like now you make some pictures close and some pictures far, and maybe you still do a few street portraits, but they're mainly candids. And like you've removed, like it's good to work in a box, but I think there can also be a point where like you need to open up one part of a box. You can still, you still want constraints to help, with that creativity, but I think there's like a point where you say, okay, I'm going to open this side. So for me, it was like being like, okay, these don't just have to be, completely like walk up to a random person, make their portrait. It can be more intentional. It can be more focused work, but it is about like representing certain groups, even if it's like these sort of very polished studio looking images, and then also these street images. I think it's more about sort of these ideas. I think about a lot of like outsider culture and how style is an armor, and sort of either it's who you think you are or who you want to be or who you want to pretend to be. And I think that runs across all the work. I mean, the Comic-Con's an obvious example. Even going to the art thing, like people, want to represent themselves a certain way. There's this artwork that's representing these artists, but then on top of that, there's how the artist dress, and there's how the people buying the art dress. And, there's sort of just all these layers of context sort of hidden in something that seems very superfluous and that doesn't really matter. But it is like how we judge people, right? Like, I mean, you take someone who, is down on their luck, you give them a haircut and put them in a nice suit, and suddenly no one's bothering them for sitting on a bench. Yeah. Right? And or even sleeping on a bench. Yeah. But then you completely reverse that, and suddenly we treat them terribly, and they could be a millionaire, right? Like it's so embedded culturally that literally like you could be harassed by law enforcement just on this sort of framework, because of how deeply it's built into the fact that like we don't know most people we walk by on the street. Yeah. So like the way we make judgments on them is like their actions. So if they're acting erratically, and how they're dressed. And how
it's almost like we use their outfit as a sort of checkbox, like or a sort of set of checkboxes. Okay, this person checks this one, checks this one, checks this one. So maybe the checkbox for the person who's not so well dressed is potentially dangerous.
Sure. And I mean, it's like
potentially smelly, potentially uninteresting.
Right. Like it has that effect, and it's curious, and it runs beyond that. Obviously it runs, to, grooming and at this, there's a multitude of levels beyond that. But I think it's just all of my work. I try to deal with that idea for my personal work, at least. That's kind of the idea and the part of culture that I'm always interested in exploring.
You seem to wrestle with that intently, and I love that. Like it seems to be a very psychological pursuit for you, what you're trying to do with your work. That's a big deal. I think some people need to hear that.
It's a struggle all the time.
Right. But I mean, that's
it's like a perpetual struggle. Well, it's like you spoke to it earlier. I mean, you spoke to like, you're like, you didn't feel like your work was accomplishing, or it just wasn't what you were wanting it to be. Mm-hmm. And, I think I'm kind of in the midst of that right now. And I'm like still trying to figure out also just that weird line of like, if it's published for my work, does that mean it's less me than if I just posted to my blog?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where is that line? And like, I recently separated my social media into 2 accounts,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but then I'm also like, should I have done that?
Yeah.
That's a whole,
Yeah.
that's like a 4-hour talk of me. So we won't go into that.
That'll be our next one. I think it's a good. Yeah, I think this is a good place to wrap up. 1, because I think you're breaking up a little bit, probably because my wife is watching Teen Mom in the other room. 2, because what was the other thing? I don't know. I forget. Anyway, there's 1. I think that it's interesting how you're able to take the foundation. You're able to take the backlog of your work as a street photographer and now apply it to this new venture at your job. And it's almost like you have this, you're trying to build the Empire State Building, and that's your job. That's your work at the community journals. But before that, you had this foundation. We were talking about foundations earlier, that you're going to build the Empire State Building on. But that the Empire State Building is, I don't know, what covers a couple of acres. That foundation is like 590 acres. You have this huge foundation. So that provides you a level of competence, but also confidence going in to this job that your thing. And so this is another reason why I think having a diligent solo project is incredibly important, because it allows you to be confident when faced with collaboration, which can very easily make you not so confident. Yeah. And if you're trying to replace that confidence with something else, like some sort of faux confidence or ego, or some sort of masquerade, that can really go sideways quickly. So it's important to build real confidence, I think. What do you think about that?
I think it's pretty strong wrap up there.
Very good. All right.
You're getting pretty good at those.
Thank you. I'm trying.
That's the secret. Try real hard. Let's wrap it up. Wait, let me wrap up my section. Try real hard and be really nice to people, even when you really just want to scream at them. But you just be really nice. And then you go home and you scream in your car on the drive home.
So at the end, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt that glory.
You just scream in your car.
Yeah.
This is like my essential life structure, is like you try really hard and you scream in your car, and then you're really polite to the people that you wanted to scream at.
You've mentioned that a couple of times. I think that's a real thing for you, Will.
No, I know. This is like 100% real Will talking about like what he does on his car ride home on days that don't go as well as the days where collaboration's beautiful and magical.
Right.
It changes the world.
It doesn't matter the people next to you. They think you're a freaking lunatic. You're just like,
That's exactly what I do. Like it's pretty comical.
I like it, man. You got to do something like that.
Like afterwards, like it's funny. Like it's funny now, but it's not so funny then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think you have to be. It's like if you can be intentional about how you handle that, it can be a really good thing. I think that's why a lot of people become MMA fighters, so that they can hit things to get out their aggression.
Exactly. I just don't have to hit things. I just it's like yoga. It's like yoga breathing, but like for anger release. It's like aggro yoga breathing.
Aggro yoga.
That's what I think about. Aggro yoga, not to be confused with acro yoga.
Okay.
What the real thing I want to know is like, what's going to be I think you need to mention Star Wars in the little tagline. Like, be like, the prequels were actually good. And then you'll get 1 million people to watch this video, and you'll get so much hate comments. They won't even watch the video to know that we really didn't even really talk about it. They'll just put hate comments down there about the prequels. Like, you'll get 800 million comments about the prequels being terrible. And then there'll be like 3 people who'll be like, they're pretty good. And then that's going to launch like the argument of the century.
I think I should make it the title, and then the thumbnail can just be Jar Jar Binks.
Oh no!
And
oh man!
I don't know, like there's text, right? There's big text that just says he saved the prequels.
The greatest character in the Star Wars universe.
I'm pretty sure somebody would like send a bomb to my front door.
Yeah, you gotta be careful messing with the Star Wars, dude.
That's it. Oh man, see now I want to talk about that. Okay, we'll save that one.
All right.
Do you like Star Wars? Is that something we could roll about, or did
I don't think I could do a 3-hour Star Wars. I have seen all Star Wars movies. But
okay.
Like, I don't know if I could go to the level like you went to when you were
Are you like a 50% fan? 70, 20?
I mean, I just don't know the rating scale of like what is like intense or not. I've seen all the movies. I've seen all the movies more than once, except maybe the newest one.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know where that puts me on this.
You're not missing anything.
I think I'm pretty like here-ish on. I did not like the last movie, by the way.
The Force Awakens or Rogue One?
The Force Awakens. I liked Rogue One.
Okay. Yeah, I compared to the newest one, The Last Jedi, The Force Awakens is beautiful.
Oh wait. Sorry, I was backwards. The newest. I don't like the newest new one.
So you don't like The Last Jedi?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I do. I thought The Force Awakens was much better.
Great. Okay, I agree with you.
Yes.
I
thought Rogue One was good.
I think The Last Jedi was a travesty.
Jedi was the worst movie ever because one, I mean, they had Luke Skywalker drinking milk from that weird creature. Two, he was like a whiny 7-year-old boy. It's like he had never even trained to be a Jedi. He was more whiny than he was in the very first Star Wars movie.
He was more wise in the first Star Wars, really.
Yes, like it was like, how could it go this far backwards? Yeah. And then when do you think it's going to be a cool fight scene, he just dissolves himself into the Force.
Yeah, so okay, my biggest issue with The Last Jedi, two biggest issues. One is a global issue, and it's based around the amount of people that were introduced to the film that should have never existed. They dedicated all this time to begin building
like Snoke
stories. Well, no, Snoke is good. We can hang on to Snoke. I mean, they killed him, but
yeah, that's what I mean. They killed him though. Like we built all this narrative, and then it was like everyone's like, "Who's it gonna be?" And they're like, "Oh, it doesn't matter because he actually was just super weak and useless, and now he's dead."
Right. No, the way they killed Snoke was like it almost felt like they were intentionally trying to be infuriating about it, but they introduced all these new people instead of dedicating time to building the people we were just introduced to in the last film.
Okay, yeah.
So all these new people came in that made you got purple hair chick, purple hair social justice warrior chick. You got the Asian girl. You got what was another one? There was a couple of big ones. The guy who was the thief, who they were supposed to. Yeah. He comes in and then turns bad, and it's like I didn't care about him the entire time.
Benicio del Toro for it, so I thought he was going to be important.
He's a good actor.
Yeah, they cast a good actor, and they're like, all right, yeah, he actually just doesn't matter at all.
Yeah,
that was the movie of like, here's a bunch of characters that don't matter at all, and then also here's some characters who should matter, and then we just kill them.
Right.
So it's like we have built no plot. We've killed the only characters left that did matter. Now there's just like 3 characters left.
Mm-hmm.
And these random characters that had no development and probably will get no development in the next movie.
Mm-hmm. And so I'll ignore the spacewalk, but my other main issue is that what infuriates me is what they did with Luke at the end, where he shows up, and this is his moment where he's going to be noble and wise, and he's going to go, you know what? You don't have to do that. Like Luke's whole premise throughout all the original movies was that he believed in the people who were the most evil. Like he believed in his father all the way up until the end. His father was the worst person in the galaxy. He killed thousands and thousands of people. And he said to him every time, like his father would metaphorically slap him in the face. And he was like, you can still be good. You can still be good. So that was his whole thing. And so he comes in the end of The Last Jedi, and you think, okay, he's gonna do that. He did that a little bit, and it was great and whatever. But Kylo, so there's this tension. You don't know if Kylo's gonna change or if he's gonna fight him. And then Kylo goes, "Yeah, I'm gonna kill you now." And then he starts shooting the thing, like every guerrilla walker starts shooting at him and blowing up the ground. And then he's still there, which is awesome, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh!
I was like, oh my gosh! They saved this movie from being the worst Star Wars movie ever.
Right.
And then you watch this, and then he comes out the end of it, and he's unscathed. And at that moment, you go, Luke is the greatest Jedi ever. This is amazing. But then they take this and they throw it into a trash compactor and just crush it when you realize he's a hologram. That took away the power of the moment. Yes. He wasn't even, like, I don't care that he projected himself across the universe. I don't care about that. Like, it would have been more amazing. They had holograms in all the movies. Like, regardless that he projected himself, it's like, whatever. It's not
right. I mean, it was just, like, and then he swings and, the lightsaber goes, but it took the power away from that moment of him surviving all of that. Yes. And then Kylo just kind of swings the thing through him, and then he's like, "See you later, bud," or whatever he did. And then, all of a sudden, Luke has a heart attack on a rock back on his planet. And the only conclusion that I can pull from this is he force projected himself so hard that he killed himself. Which is, and Luke is the most legendary character in Star Wars. Why would you kill him that way?
It was so weak.
It would
have been better if he'd gone there, and even if Kylo Ren had killed him, it would have been better.
Yeah, right.
Anything.
Right.
Anything would have been better than a force projection, and then, like, he's just like, ugh.
Yeah, no, he cuts him.
That took too much out of me. It's like, really? That took too much out of you? Why didn't you just have somebody throw down a little chip thing and make a hologram of you?
Yeah. And I would have been okay with Kylo Ren coming to that planet. They get in a little fight. Kylo Ren, because Luke's so old, he betters him, chops his head off, and his head lives for a second and says, "You can still become good, Kylo," and then he dies. Like, that would have been way better.
Totally fine. Or he could have just been like, "I won't fight you, Kylo. You can just kill me." And then Kylo kills him. Because he's, like, reached enlightenment. So he's like, you know what? Like, I've given you what I gave my father. Here, just do it.
That would have been bold.
Yeah, I still would have been fine. I would have been fine with any of that. I just was not fine with anything that happened in that movie.
and then Snoke gets cut in half.
That was just made it even worse. It was just like, why even introduce? Like, he had zero value.
Why introduce him at all?
Yeah, like, why did he exist?
Yeah.
Like, if he had no, like, it's like, okay, he tempted Kylo to the dark side, but kind of not really, because Kylo's tempted to the dark side because Luke kind of failed him by, like, pulling his lightsaber out when he saw the evil in him, like, and then they don't explain who Snoke is at all, and it's like, Snoke was supposed to have, like, there was, like, I feel bad for all the fan ideas. You know how many more there's going to be now about who he is? Like, the fan fiction of, like, this is who Snoke actually is. It's like, oh, great. Now we're going to get 800 million more, and it will never be resolved until somebody offhandedly says, Snoke was this. And they're like, oh, what?
Right.
It's going to be like, in some lame interview, someone's just going to be like, yeah, this is what Snoke was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And then everyone's going to be like, I mean, it's also, do you think some of the fact that each one is directed by someone else, and isn't each one written by someone else?
I think so, yeah. I think they individually wrote it, and I think that J.J. Abrams gave him, like, his notes, and he didn't do what, like, he diverged from that.
J.J. Abrams should have just done all of them.
Yeah, he did. I think he did a great job with the first one. I think it was pretty good.
I think it just would have been better. I think it just this was an example. You know what we should use this example for? Collaboration gone wrong.
Right.
This is like too many hands in the pot. Because it's like the movies are so sequential. Like, the problem is it's not like a movie series where, like, the next one can kind of just not be about the same thing. And just sort of have, like, similar characters, but, like, a very different universe or, like, plot. It's like, it's just so sequential. Like, the characters are so rooted in like
there has to be a
so
consistent
many movies,
through line. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's like one of the problems. It's like it's such a through line series of movies that like it's so hard. I think it's just like when they do the prequels, like it's so hard to continue that narrative that's meant to span 9 movies.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, it's a semi impossible problem at this point. Like, and I think that now that Disney has the reins, what we're seeing is that it's losing. I think it's losing its direction, and it's going a lot of different direction. And perhaps there's some monetary reasons for that, but I don't know. But at least with the prequels, like people criticize them, but it was a clear vision from George Lucas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you speaking to somebody else in your house?
Sorry, no. Somebody. I thought I heard Sarah at the door, but wasn't Sarah.
Oh, okay.
There's nobody at the door.
Okay.
Yeah. No. I mean, the sequels, for all of their flaws, like they didn't have the problem that last movie had.
Yeah.
Just nothing made any sense. Things were just killed. Like, people were just killed randomly. There's characters that like, why was Benicio del Toro's character even exist? Like, why did he need to exist?
Right.
Like, why did they gave him, like, people got too much screen time for no reason. It
Right.
was almost like they're like, we need to kill X number of people off. It just felt like a filler movie. Like, it felt like it was just a bunch of things that were to fill in during a real movie to fill in the holes. And they're like, okay, we just need to get to X point where there's only Kylo and Rey, and okay, great. Right. Like, how we get there, no one cares.
Right. And so
we don't care at all.
What you just did is a good example of something, which is it's memorability, which is you just mentioned 3 different names of people who are huge parts of the movie for you, and you actually care about them. That's why you remember their name, is because you care about them. But for example, Rogue One, can you name anybody in Rogue One?
No.
Okay. So the people who are the memorable ones who we actually care about, it means that they did a good job building their story to some extent.
Yeah.
We actually care about what's happening to them. We want them to succeed, which is a sign of a good storyline. Well, in this one, they took the spotlights away from them and put them on this Asian chick and this guy who has I think he had a stutter, or the thief guy. Then you got they focus on what was the first one I mentioned? That was another one. Purple hair chick. She flies the ship hyperdrive through the thing and saves the day after keeping this whole plot from I forget the other guy's name, the guy who flies the X-wing. It's like there was this whole thing where she was actually wise, but she wasn't telling him, and she was treating him like he was a child, and the whole thing was it wasn't compelling. It wasn't interesting. They could have focused all this time on developing Rey and Luke and Kylo and Snoke. They took Snoke away, which is such a he was the overarching evil. Now he's gone.
It's like if they killed the Emperor just randomly before the end of the
of A New Hope.
Yeah, like they're just like, all right, he's gone. Actually, he wasn't important at all. Whereas, like, for the whole thing, he was like this overarching force. Like, he almost wasn't even a person in us. Like, he existed as like this extreme force.
Yes. He was the ultimate evil that had to be conquered. Yes,
and like, and it then created an interesting narrative too, because like Darth Vader was never quite just the antagonist, right? He existed in this very interesting dualistic plane but now, like with Kylo, it's like you don't have that, so you just have him and Rey as these like it sort of simplifies it.
Yeah.
Level.
Which I don't know, maybe that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to simplify the whole thing and put the focus on Kylo and Rey, which hopefully that pans out. I don't mind them putting the focus on Kylo and Rey.
Sure, that's fine.
Because Kylo is Kylo is a nuanced character who we care about. He's an amazing evil character, because you don't just feel like he's just ultimately evil. He's conflicted, and he's like petulant, and he's there because he's hurt, right? Which is how Darth Vader got to where he got. So we want him to become good. What's going to happen to him?
Sure. And I get like I get not having Luke and Snoke even exist. I do get to that point, because it is sort of this idea of like everything old is washed away and there's only the new.
Right.
But I just think like the way they were removed just made no sense.
It should have been more legendary, I think.
Yeah.
Should have.
It just seemed like they didn't want to have to deal with it, so they just got rid of them.
Right.
Like, especially Snoke. I mean, Luke still quite a bit, but like to have waited so long for Luke to return. I think there's also just a simple fan problem of like, you have waited all this time for Luke. Yeah. And then and then he's just wimpy, annoying.
We love Luke, and it's like, what have you done to our hero?
It's like, he's just terrible in every respect. And then it's like, his redemption is barely a redemption. Like, barely. Like, it's like, you're kind of like, and then the scene where he's like with Yoda and like complaining, and then the tree gets caught on fire and he's like whining. It's just like, what? Like, how did he spend all this time? Like, at the end of the original trilogy, like, he's like such a different being, and it's like, how could just like Kylo betraying him like just destroy and like, because it's supposed to exist as this like sort of other, like this, like, right, like the Jedi is like this like other plane of existence, like being enlightened, like being the Buddha, and then suddenly the Buddha just goes back to being like a 15-year-old kid and like is hiding on an island, like, I don't want to do anything. Like, he's like shirking all responsibilities,
right?
And then like still doesn't even kind of resolve it at the end, either, in any meaningful way. Yeah, I don't know.
Freaking stupid Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's sad because you just it makes you have to let go of some stuff, you know?
Yes. Maybe that's what it's really about. They're trying to get you to let go.
They're trying to dismantle the Star Wars universe so that everybody will stop caring about it.
I thought Han Solo movie was also better than...
I haven't even seen that one yet.
It got terrible reviews. I still think it like followed a plot structure that like was better.
Focused?
Yeah, like, and it's like it kind of like into the prequels. Like, is it perfect? Most definitely not. Does it like make sense? Yes. Like, does it kind of touch on why characters are a certain way? Does it introduce like the main characters that are interesting? Yes. And is it like mainly focus on those main people minus like one person who's like important to him? You know, like, it's like another. It's like, yes. It's not just like randomly like Solo movie, except it's actually, he's just a minor character who doesn't matter, and it's really about these random people who also don't matter. And then it ends like the main 5 people, like, remember them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, I'm gonna need you to write down notes for about Star Wars and your thoughts on it, and the prequels and the original
800 million
ones.
views later. Like, oh, did you believe they said that?
And also, maybe we can go different directions. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, who knows? And we'll hold that off until next time, and we'll wrap it up here. Where can people find you?
Oh, people can find me. Oh, where can people find me? Okay, you can find me. Oh no, oh god, I didn't make my computer this whole time until right now. You can find me on Instagram at Will Crooks Photo. That's like editorial work, so that's where all that stuff lives. And then Whack Avenue over here at Whack Avenue.
The infamous
Avenue. Yeah, it's super infamous. It's a super stupid name, but I have to live with it because I chose it a long time ago.
It's not stupid. It's a great name.
It's still there. It's a brand now.
Yeah. You can't do anything about it now.
You gotta just accept it. You just gotta live with your decisions, like in Star Wars. They have to live. Yes. They have to live with their decisions they made.
Yeah, Whack Avenue is You're the Last Jedi, Will, and you have to deal with that.
All right, Jay.
Okay, well, I'll link below to those things. This has been a lovely conversation. We're going to do this again soon, I hope. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Goodbye.
Bye, guys.